I always loved Christmas. It was the one time of year when everything felt right in the world, as though the snow and twinkling lights had the power to smooth out life's jagged edges. There was something magical about the season, the snow-covered streets, the smell of pine filling the house, the glow of the fireplace as we sipped hot cocoa. Even as an adult, Christmas felt like an anchor, a moment to pause and take stock of what truly mattered. For years, my wife, Laura, had been the heart of our holiday celebrations. She had a gift for making the season special. From the perfect tree to the carefully chosen gifts, she turned every detail into something extraordinary. I used to joke that she could make a Hallmark movie jealous. And the truth was, I loved that about her. I loved the way her eyes lit up as she strung the lights on the tree, or the way she danced in the kitchen while Christmas cookies baked in the oven. But this year, something was different. The festive magic I had come to expect wasn't there. Laura seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere far away. She smiled less, and her laughter, usually infectious and frequent, had become a rare sound. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone gets stressed around the holidays. But as the days ticked closer to Christmas, her distance became harder to ignore. It started with small things, things I told myself were insignificant. At the tree farm, a tradition we cherished every year, Laura barely participated. Usually, she'd scour every row, carefully inspecting each tree and debating its merits. This year, she stood back with her arms crossed, nodding indifferently as I made suggestions. "What about this one?" I asked, pointing to a full, symmetrical fir that seemed perfect. "It's fine," she said, her tone flat. Her response stung more than it should have. "Fine. That's all you've got?" "Come on, this is our Christmas tree," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into the moment. Laura forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine, Nick. Let's just pick one and go. I'm tired." Tired. That single word began to haunt me. She'd been using it a lot lately, always accompanied by a dismissive wave of her hand or a strained smile. I chalked it up to work stress. Laura's job could be demanding, especially at the end of the year. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. The shift in her behavior didn't stop at the tree farm. As we decorated the house, another tradition we both used to love, Laura's enthusiasm was nowhere to be found. I pulled out the ornaments, each one carrying a memory from our 8 years of marriage, and handed them to her, but she barely looked at them before hanging them on the tree. There was no laughter, no reminiscing about where we'd bought them or the trips we'd taken. It felt mechanical, like she was just going through the motions. At one point, I turned to her, holding up an ornament shaped like a tiny cabin. "Remember this one? From that weekend in the mountains?" She glanced at it briefly and nodded. "Yeah. Cute. Cute." That was it. No smile, no warmth, no shared memory. I stood there for a moment, holding the ornament, trying to push down the wave of unease rising in my chest. This wasn't like her. Laura loved Christmas. She loved these little moments. What was happening? The night before Christmas Eve, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark and quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the heater kicking on. Laura was next to me, her breathing slow and steady, but I could tell she wasn't really asleep. Her body was tense, her movements deliberate. It was the kind of stillness that spoke of a restless mind. I turned my head to look at her. In the dim light from the hallway, I could just make out the curve of her face. She looked fragile, somehow. Like a shell of the woman I'd fallen in love with. "Laura," I said quietly, breaking the silence. She didn't respond at first, and for a moment, I thought she might ignore me altogether. But then she rolled over to face me, her eyes half open, her expression guarded. "What's wrong?" I asked. "You've been so distant lately. Is it work? Something with your family?" She hesitated, her eyes searching mine in the darkness. "It's nothing, Nick," she said finally, her voice soft but unconvincing. "I promise." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take her words at face value, to accept that everything was fine and that I was imagining things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her eyes, her voice, her posture, everything about her screamed that she was hiding something. "I'm here, you know," I said, reaching for her hand. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." She pulled her hand away gently and turned onto her other side. "I'm just tired, Nick. Go to sleep." But I couldn't. Not this time. The morning after that restless night, I woke to an empty bed. Laura was already downstairs, her faint movements in the kitchen breaking the quiet of the house. The smell of coffee drifted up, warm and inviting, but the unease in my chest dampened any sense of comfort. As I made my way to the kitchen, I noticed her at the counter, staring at her phone. She was so focused that she didn't hear me enter. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her thumb twitching slightly as if she was debating whether to press something. When she finally noticed me, she startled, quickly locking the phone and setting it face down on the counter. "Morning," she said, too brightly, her voice tinged with nervous energy. "Coffee's ready." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Morning." I poured myself a cup, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She busied herself with the breakfast she wasn't really eating, her movements hurried and jerky. "Anything interesting on your phone this morning?" I asked casually, though my heart was pounding. She froze for just a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. "Just work stuff," she said. "Emails. You know how it is." "Emails?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "On Christmas Eve?" Her smile faltered, and she turned away, fiddling with the toaster as if it required her full attention. "Some people don't stop working, I guess," she mumbled. I wanted to press her further, but something in her tone made me stop. Instead, I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness matching the pit in my stomach. Later that day, as we prepared for dinner with some of our closest friends, the tension between us became more apparent. Laura flitted around the house, tidying things that didn't need tidying, avoiding eye contact, and keeping her phone within arm's reach at all times. It wasn't like her. Usually, she'd be fully engaged, laughing, singing along to Christmas music, and stealing kisses from me when I least expected it. But this year, it felt like she was a stranger in our home. As I set the dining table, I decided I couldn't let it go any longer. "Laura," I said, catching her as she rearranged the already perfect couch pillows. "Can we talk?" She looked up, her face pale. "Talk about what?" "You've been acting different," I said carefully. 4 weeks now. I feel like you're not really here anymore. Like you're somewhere else entirely. What's going on?" Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she shook her head, brushing past me. "I'm fine, Nick. I told you, it's just stress. Can we not do this right now?" I stared after her, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Not do what?" "Have a conversation about our marriage? About why you're acting like you don't even want to be here." Her steps faltered, and for a moment, I thought she might turn around, might finally open up and tell me what was wrong. But instead, she walked into the bathroom and shut the door, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room with a knot of anger and sadness tightening in my chest. The dinner with friends was torture. Laura put on her best performance, laughing at jokes, telling stories, and pretending like everything was fine. But I knew her too well. Her laughter didn't reach her eyes, and her smiles were forced. She avoided me whenever she could, busying herself with serving dishes or refilling drinks, but when she couldn't avoid me, her hand felt cold in mine. Our friends, thankfully, didn't seem to notice. Or if they did, they were polite enough not to say anything. But as the night wore on, I couldn't keep up the facade any longer. Every glance at Laura, every fake laugh, felt like another crack in the foundation of our life together. When the last guest left, the silence that filled the house was deafening. Laura busied herself with the dishes, her back turned to me as she scrubbed plates with unnecessary force. I watched her for a moment, my frustration boiling over. "Laura," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "We need to talk. Now." She froze, her hands still in the sink. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes guarded. "Nick, can this wait? I'm exhausted." "No," I said sharply. "It can't. I've been waiting for weeks now, and I'm done pretending everything is fine. It's not fine. You're not fine. And I need to know what's going on." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might finally tell me. But instead, she shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Nick, I can't do this right now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. Not tonight." Something inside me snapped. "Not tonight. When, then? After Christmas? After you've decided whatever it is you're deciding behind my back." Her tears spilled over, and she turned away, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the sink. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. I need time." "Time for what?" I demanded. "To figure out how to tell me the truth. To keep lying to me. Because whatever this is, Laura, it's not working." She didn't answer. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt like we were on opposite sides of a chasm too wide to bridge. That night, as I lay alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose everything. Whatever Laura was hiding, it was bigger than I had imagined. And as much as I wanted to believe in us, in the life we had built together, I couldn't ignore the cracks that had formed between us. The weight of her silence was suffocating, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it crushed me entirely. Christmas morning arrived with the same heaviness that had been hanging over us for weeks. The usual joy, the excitement of unwrapping gifts, the warmth of shared traditions, was nowhere to be found. Laura and I moved through the motions like actors in a play, our lines rehearsed but hollow. I handed her a small box wrapped in red paper, watching her carefully as she took it. It was a necklace, one I'd picked out weeks ago when things still felt normal. A silver pendant shaped like a snowflake, delicate and unique, just like I'd always thought of her. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she pulled the necklace from the box. "It's beautiful," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the last word. "Do you like it?" I asked, my chest tightening as I searched her face for some sign of the woman I'd fallen in love with. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "I love it, Nick." "Thank you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that we could move past this strange tension and find our way back to each other. But deep down, I knew better. The distance between us was a chasm now, wide and unrelenting. The moment of truth came later that evening. The house was quiet, the remnants of Christmas dinner still scattered across the table. Laura had barely touched her plate, and the wine in her glass sat untouched. She'd been pacing the living room for the past hour, her hands wringing nervously as she glanced at her phone. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Laura," I said, my voice firm, "sit down." She stopped pacing, her eyes wide with surprise. "Nick, Please," I interrupted. "Just sit." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I sat across from her, my heart pounding as I searched her face for answers. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. You've been distant, distracted, and I know you're hiding something. I need to know the truth, Laura. Whatever it is, just tell me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, biting her lip as though the words were too painful to say. "Nick," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth," I said, leaning forward. "Start with what you've been hiding from me. Because I can't move forward until I know." She took a deep, shaky breath, her shoulders trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said finally. "I swear, Nick. I didn't plan any of it." "Plan what?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "What didn't you plan?" Her hands tightened in her lap, and she squeezed her eyes shut. I've been seeing someone," she said, the words barely audible. The room spun. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "You've been what?" I said, my voice sharp and disbelieving. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake, Nick. I was lonely, and I felt like we were so far apart, and he was there." My hands clenched into fists as anger and heartbreak surged through me. "Who?" I demanded. "Who was there, Laura? Who the hell have you been seeing?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. It's someone from work." "Someone from work?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "You've been having an affair with someone from work, and you didn't think to tell me?" "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, sobbing now. "I didn't want to hurt you, Nick. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But I ended it. I ended it weeks ago." "Doesn't feel like you ended it," I said bitterly. "Not with the way you've been acting. Not with the way you've been glued to your phone. How am I supposed to believe you?" She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Because I'm telling you the truth now," she said. "Because I can't keep lying to you. I love you, Nick. I never stopped loving you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Love? How could she say she loved me after what she'd done? After the lies, the deceit, the betrayal? I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, and realized I didn't recognize her at all. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." She sobbed harder, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. "I'll go to counseling, I'll quit my job, I'll do anything, Nick. Just, please don't give up on us." But as I sat there, staring at the shattered remains of our marriage, I couldn't see a way forward. The life we'd built, the love we'd shared, it all felt like a distant memory now, buried beneath the weight of her betrayal. That night, I slept on the couch, the cold emptiness of the living room reflecting the hollowness I felt inside. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. The days after Laura's confession were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, work, the house, even eating felt like monumental tasks. I moved through my days in a haze, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a suffocating fog. The woman I'd shared my life with, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, had ripped the foundation of our marriage out from under me. Laura tried to reach me. She left notes on the kitchen counter, short messages pleading for me to talk to her. She texted me while I was at work, sending long, emotional paragraphs about how sorry she was, how she wanted to fix things. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time her name popped up on my phone, I felt a pang of anger and sadness that I couldn't suppress. She'd say things like, "I know I hurt you, Nick. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do anything to earn it." Or, "You're my everything. Please don't let this be the end of us." But what did those words mean now? She had been my everything too, and yet here we were. One evening, a few days after her confession, I came home to find Laura sitting at the kitchen table. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, her hair unkempt in a way that felt unnatural for her. She was clutching a mug of tea, staring down into it as though it might hold the answers to her guilt. "Nick," she said softly as I stepped inside, her voice tentative. "Can we talk?" I set my keys on the counter, my chest tightening. "What's there to talk about, Laura? You've said everything already." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I know I hurt you, and I know I can't undo what I did. But I can't just sit here and let everything we've built fall apart without trying." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Trying? Now you want to try? Where was this effort before, Laura? Before you decided to run to someone else?" Her face crumpled, and tears filled her eyes. "I was stupid. I was selfish. I let my insecurities get the better of me, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But I love you, Nick. I've always loved you. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling. How you were feeling." I repeated, my voice rising. "You think that excuses what you did? Do you have any idea what it feels like to look at you and see a stranger? To wonder how many lies you've told me over the years?" She shook her head, her tears spilling over. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't about you, Nick. It was about me. I felt like I was losing myself, like I wasn't enough for you anymore." I stared at her, my heart aching with a mixture of anger and sadness. "So instead of talking to me, instead of letting me in, you decided to cheat? To betray everything we built together?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her hands trembling. "It started out as nothing, just conversations. I never thought it would go so far. But it did," I said bitterly. "And now, here we are." She reached out for my hand, but I pulled away, unable to let her touch me. "Nick, I'll do anything," she said, her voice trembling. "Counseling, quitting my job, anything you ask. Just, please don't give up on us." I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, and I felt the weight of her words. But I also felt the crushing weight of her betrayal. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her. But the wound was too fresh, too deep. "I don't know if I can," I said finally, my voice quiet. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The following days were agonizing. Laura gave me space, staying at a friend's house for a while to let me think. But the silence in the house was unbearable. Everywhere I turned, I saw memories of her, her favorite mug on the shelf, the blanket she always curled up with on the couch, the photographs of us smiling on vacations that now felt like they belonged to another life. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and spending more time with friends. But even then, I couldn't escape the questions that plagued me. Could I ever forgive her? Could we rebuild what we'd lost? Or was this the end? One evening, as I sat alone on the couch, staring at the flickering light of the fireplace, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Laura and me at our happiest, laughing at a picnic, dancing at a wedding, holding hands on a snowy street. My chest ached as I realized how far we drifted from those moments. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built. I thought about her smile, her laugh, the way she used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. And I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the deceit, the pain that had shattered everything. I didn't know if I could forgive her. But I also didn't know if I could let her go. Laura's absence in the house was both a relief and a constant reminder of the cracks in our marriage. I'd asked for space, and she'd given it to me, retreating to a friend's place while I tried to piece together my thoughts. But instead of clarity, all I found was a swirling mess of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, and, to my surprise, the faintest trace of longing. I missed her. Not the Laura who had lied to me, who had broken my trust, but the Laura who had been my partner, my confidant, my best friend. The Laura who had made me laugh until my sides hurt, who had held my hand through my darkest days. I missed the life we built together, even as I struggled to reconcile it with the lies she'd told. A week after she left, Laura texted me. "Laura, Nick, can we talk? Please. Just once. If you still want space after that, I'll respect it, but I need to see you. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep her at arm's length. But another part of me, the part that still felt the echo of what we'd once had, couldn't let go completely. Fine. Tomorrow night. Her response came almost instantly. Laura, thank you. The next evening, I sat in the living room, waiting for her to arrive. The house felt different, colder somehow, as though it had absorbed the tension of the past few weeks. When the doorbell rang, I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't ready for this conversation, but I knew it had to happen. Laura stepped inside, her face pale and drawn. She looked nervous, her hands clutching a small bag as though it were a lifeline. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavy and charged. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I replied, my voice flat. She set the bag down and glanced around the room, as if searching for something familiar to hold on to. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said. I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to right now. You're not wrong, I said, folding my arms. So say what you need to say. She winced at the coldness in my tone, but she nodded, taking a deep breath. Nick, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even imagine. But I can't let us go without trying to make this right. I stared at her, my jaw tight. You want to make this right? How, Laura? How do you fix something like this? I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Counseling, quitting my job, whatever you ask, I'll do it. I can't lose you, Nick. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt my resolve falter. But then the anger surged back, hot and relentless. You already lost me, Laura, I said, my voice shaking. The moment you decided to lie to me, to betray everything we had, you lost me. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you have any idea how much you've destroyed? Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded. I do, she whispered. I think about it every day. And I hate myself for it. But Nick, I love you. I've always loved you. Loved me? I repeated bitterly. You don't cheat on someone you love, Laura. You don't lie to someone you love. I know, she said, her sobs growing louder. I know I messed up, Nick. I know I don't deserve you. But I'm begging you to give me one more chance. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to keep my emotions in check. Why, Laura? I asked. Why did you do it? Was I not enough? Was our life not enough? It wasn't about you, she said, her voice desperate. It was about me. I felt like I was losing myself, like I wasn't good enough anymore. And he made me feel seen. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Seen? I said bitterly. You mean he stroked your ego while you destroyed our marriage? She didn't respond, her shoulders shaking as she cried. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hitch of her sobs. Eventually, I sat down across from her, my hands clasped tightly together. I don't know if I can forgive you, Laura, I said finally. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with hope and fear. But is there a chance, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on me. Was there a chance? Could I rebuild what she'd broken? Or was it too late? I don't know, I said honestly. But if there is, it's going to take time. A lot of time. She nodded, her tears falling again. I'll wait, she said. As long as it takes, I'll wait. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the flickering flames of the fireplace. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days that followed Laura's visit were some of the most emotionally exhausting of my life. She kept her word, giving me the space I needed, but the silence was a double-edged sword. It gave me time to think, about her, about us, about everything that had happened, but it also gave my mind room to spiral. There were moments when I wanted to forgive her, to believe that we could rebuild what was broken. But there were just as many moments when the betrayal hit me all over again, fresh and raw, making me question whether I could ever truly move past it. 2 weeks later, Laura texted me. "Laura, I've started seeing a counselor. I know it's too soon for us to talk about reconciliation, but I wanted you to know I'm trying." I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions conflicted. I appreciated her effort, but it didn't erase the hurt. Still, it was a step, a small one, but a step nonetheless. Thanks for letting me know. It wasn't much, but it was all I could manage. I needed more time to process everything before I could even think about what came next. A month passed, and the tension between us began to ease, if only slightly. Laura continued her counseling sessions and kept her distance, though she texted me occasionally to check in. I stayed in the house, trying to rediscover who I was outside of our relationship. It wasn't easy, every corner of the house felt like a reminder of what we'd lost, but it was necessary. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos again. There was one in particular that caught my eye, a picture of us from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, the sun setting behind us, her arms wrapped around my waist as we smiled at the camera. We looked so happy, so in love. I stared at the photo for a long time, wondering if that version of us could ever exist again. Eventually, Laura and I agreed to meet again. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. If nothing else, I needed closure, whether that meant moving forward together or letting go for good. We met at a park, the crisp spring air carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Laura looked nervous as she approached me, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her coat. I noticed the faint lines of exhaustion under her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to sag slightly. She wasn't the vibrant, confident woman I'd married, but she wasn't the woman who had betrayed me, either. She was someone in between, someone trying to find her way back. "Hi," she said softly, stopping a few feet away from me. "Hi," I replied, my voice equally tentative. We sat on a bench overlooking the lake, the water glinting in the fading sunlight. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. "How have you been?" she asked finally. "Better," I said truthfully. "Still figuring things out, but better." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I've been working on myself. Trying to understand why I did what I did. It's not an excuse, Nick, but I think I've finally started to see how much I let my insecurities control me." I looked at her, searching her face for any signs of dishonesty, but there were none. She seemed genuine, her words sincere. "I've been thinking a lot too," I said, my voice quiet. "About us, about what happened. And I'm not going to lie, Laura, it still hurts. A lot. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget what you did." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I don't expect you to. I don't deserve to be forgiven, but I hope. I hope you'll give me the chance to earn your trust again. Even if it takes years." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But then I thought about the photo from our honeymoon, about the life we'd built together. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth fighting for. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," I said finally. "But I'm willing to try." Slowly. Relief washed over her face, and she nodded, tears spilling over. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down, Nick. I promise." The road to rebuilding wasn't easy. Trust didn't return overnight, and the scars of her betrayal didn't fade quickly. But we took it one day at a time, attending counseling together, having honest conversations, and slowly rediscovering what had brought us together in the first place. There were setbacks, moments when the anger or sadness resurfaced, but there were also moments of hope, small glimpses of the life we'd once shared. And with each passing day, those moments became a little brighter, a little more frequent. A year later, as we sat on the couch together, her head resting on my shoulder, I realized something. Our marriage would never be the same as it was before the betrayal, but maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need to go back to what we had. Maybe we could build something new, something stronger. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.